Hello, everybody. This is Lightning Talk A. Yes, brilliant. Thank you. So if you're meant to be here for Lightning Talk A, you're in the right place. If you're not for Lightning Talk A, you're meant to be somewhere else, or you can stay if you want, because we've got a really interesting lineup of speakers today. So we should probably get started because we've got 3 lightning talks. So I'm just going to introduce our first speaker, who is Sarah Maule from the University of Westminster. And Sarah's going to be talking about a materials library actually at the University of Ravensbourne from her previous role. So Sarah, if you'd like to come up and give me a shout if there's any technical details.
Thank you. Hello, are we all surviving? I see lots of fanning. I'll take that as a good sign. Right, let me just press start. So, hi, I'm Sarah Maule. I currently work at the University of Westminster and I manage their arts campus, their Harrow Library, so nowhere near Westminster. But this was about a project that I did when I was Head of Learning Resources at Ravensbourne, which has recently gone through the long and painful taught degree awarding powers process and is now Ravensbourne University London, so well done to them. So this materials library, yes, that works. Came about for a number of reasons. They'd been in the purpose-built new campus for about 5 years, and the sort of light bulb sort of went off in my head, and I thought this is the moment to push for this. At the beginning, when I got there was a VC who was really focused around digital. Everything was paperless. Everyone was making everything on their MacBooks, and you could see no student work around the building. And we had a new vice-chancellor who was kind of really into that idea of, like physically making things, which is quite novel. And so she really wanted to see more creativity on show. And I saw this as an opportunity to introduce something that I've always wanted to since the library opened sort of 5 years before that. Ravensbourne delivers courses such as product design, fashion design, accessories, architecture, interiors, and that sort of thing. And it has really strong links with industry. And nearly every course has a live brief with a variety of different companies. So this means that students are already producing work for clients, often with it being put into production and sold in outlets as well. So there's a real need for students to be aware of new and popular materials in industry. Every year they do a live brief with Marks and Spencer's around Easter eggs. So often or not, the packaging that the Easter eggs are in an M&S are made by product design students at Ravensbourne, which is great. So at the time this started, it was summer 2015, and these 3 elements weren't really linked in any particular way. Students were either dealing with them in isolation, or they were missing the elements out altogether. The research wasn't happening, or they weren't feeling confident in the prototyping labs, or they weren't really aware of any new materials. Staff were complaining that when it came to them marking students' work, they were kind of getting a bit fed up of seeing the same materials used time and time again. And they were encouraging students to research innovative materials and signposting them for places to go, but it just wasn't really working out, and they weren't seeing anything new in the final pieces. So this is how we got to the point that we were at. Work began on scoping out a few options on how to go from nothing to materials library in the summer of 2015. A few years previously, I'd met with the well-known materials consultant, Margaret Pope, and she talked me through the options when the desire that I had was to first open a new one. Margaret and I discussed the possibility of hiring a member of staff whose sole responsibility it is to create and maintain a materials library. And whilst this option works for many institutions, Ravensbourne kind of operates slightly differently to some other higher education institutions in that it has virtually no library staff. So after a significant restructure in 2010, the library staff had all been obliterated. And it was clear from kind of benchmarking with institutions that did have a member of staff that was dedicated to being a materials librarian, this position would realistically have to be a full-time job. because part of that would be keeping abreast of materials development. It requires extensive research, networking for samples, visiting design fairs, creating a database, cataloguing things, and then withdrawing old samples. So politically, adding to the library staff was going to be a business case that I just couldn't crack. I tried it before, and I knew for a new initiative it would just be even harder, and it would be much easier to bid for someone to assist with the engagement of the library once it was established. So the other option then was to look at outsourcing the specialism of creating and maintaining a materials library. So I went to talk with one gallery who Ravensbourne had worked with in the past, and they had their own materials library, and they were looking to expand their consultancy business to provide materials libraries. It was clearly impressive, but I felt that the shelving and the layout, and most importantly, the database wasn't as intuitive as I'd like to provide to students, so I was looking for another option. I contacted Material Connection, who were already supplying us with our database for materials, and they explained that they too provided materials libraries which complemented the samples in their database. So each physical library is tailored to the location and the courses and the content of those courses. So after many discussions with them and talking with institutions that they had supplied their physical libraries with in the past, it became clear that this was the best option for Ravensbourne. The contract that we signed was a subscription for 500 new materials delivered every year for 3 years. The samples are mounted onto Tabula, and they have corresponding information online for users to access. The materials are selected by a jury on a quarterly basis, and the jury is made up of material scientists and industry leaders, which means that you can also stream these juries online, so you can watch them and you can tell students to tune in and watch them, which is really, really great. My desire was to have like a live streaming of it within the library, but there was some AV problems. And this was a great way to ensure that the materials library content did not stagnate, and it was of industry standard, and it was maintained, but without having staffing specialism to do that. There's the timeline of how we did it. It was pretty stressful. We actually had to have like a conference call on their Thanksgiving, and everyone was really grumpy because it was their Thanksgiving, but we got there in the end. So here's the library just before we opened it on day one. The shelves actually open, and so when the new samples come in, you can stack the old samples inside them, which no other library that they'd supplied had ever thought to do that before, but we have no storage whatsoever at Ravensbourne, so it was like my first consideration of where do they go. And quite nicely, the end panels were made from this really nice material of old paper that had been mulched into this really thick wood. So you can also see on this one that on each tabula they have a number in the corner, they have a classification, a QR code to go to online, and then they have some signs as to their sustainability rating and things like that. So the library was launched in April. We had a nice ribbon cutting ceremony. And we had a few months left of term to start embedding it and getting the word out with this amazing new resource. So this is the first induction into the space, and this was actually the morning after that we launched. Standing up is Nadine. She teaches on the product design course and was one of the key champions for the library. We worked on an induction together for the first year students with the idea that we'd get them familiar with it in time for their return after summer into year two. We also did this induction with a number of fashion courses and had library staff shadow the induction for feedback, ideas on how to improve it, and ways that we could be able to interact with students because it was new for all of us. The best idea that we got came from the Copenhagen Materials Library, where they said that they blindfold students and they get other students to bring a material to them, and they have to guess what they think it is or what it's made from, what it smells like, and often or not they're obviously completely wrong, but it really kind of makes them see it in a different way. So we had one member of library staff and one member of academic staff went on a visit to the Material Connection headquarters in June for training. So we gained a lot of information from that, and then we cascaded it to the wider library team. And then that formed the basis for myself and Nadine to present at an all-academic staff conference in early July 2017. So on reflection, this was a really quick process, but it was kind of necessary to build on that momentum gained during the installation and the launch, because then we had the summer to get to grips with it ourselves. Nadine and I were really keen to raise awareness of this. So the Double Diamond is a process model created by the Design Council in 2005. It's a graphic representation of a type of design process, and its development was based on case studies gathered from design departments at 11 different global firms. So Nadine wanted students to follow this process when designing anything, and to succeed in this, she wanted students to visit the materials library during both parts of the diamond. So she wanted them to visit in the first half for inspiration, and then in the second half, once the design brief was kind of finalised, more precise research within the library could take place. And for most students, this seemed to really make sense to them. This also included discussing the research outcomes with the prototyping technicians, so they could see if they could use those materials in our prototyping labs. So that kind of meant that the problem at the beginning of sort of research, materials innovation and prototyping not being linked at all was sort of solved. And I would have done a Venn diagram, but I couldn't work out how to do one on SmartArt. So academic staff were pretty receptive to this. They liked the idea, and they started using it as a process to encourage students to follow. And then next came the task of raising awareness with the student community. So Ravensbourne has this amazing open plan building where you can see at least to 5 floors, you can see what's happening on all the other floors. And so we chose the location of the library to be right by the centre of that atrium, so everyone could see it from around the building. So pretty quickly, people were sort of asking, what's that new thing within the library, which was a great start. But here are some of the amazing activities that Billy, our events coordinator, organised. I was there for the materials competition, and then I left my post soon after, so she brilliantly took it forward with all these other sessions as well. But Materials Madness was something I was around for. It was run during we called it Engagement Week or Reading Week in the first term. And it was a 5-day project. We launched it on the Monday. Billy had contacted suppliers of the materials who supplied the materials held in the library. She kind of had to politely ask for them or paid for them. And we got these really big sets of them, and students signed up, and then we grouped them based on their courses. So the aim was to have students with a range of skills from different courses working together, and it really worked. We had fashion students mixed with product design students, mixed with digital advertising students, and this meant that they were constantly thinking of all aspects of the product that they were creating, so how to design it, market it, sell it, what the target audience was, and they were each given a range of materials, and they were given time in the prototyping labs and support with the materials research element of it. We all judged the presentations on the Friday, and they all presented to each other, and they were of really, really high quality. The feedback was really incredibly heartwarming, and they'd said, we need to run this again as soon as possible. And we were like, well, just give us some time, please. And the winners received a prize that we would buy them a material of their choosing, up to, I think it was about £50 or something, for their next project that they were working on. Here are some of the outcomes. My time's up. I'll go really quickly. It was clear that the database, along with the physical samples, assists users with understanding on a really deeper level. So the first time you see a material, you might jump to one conclusion on what its use was best suited for, but students now question this more and more. We had mentions in publications, and this was an image of us in New Design magazine, and it attracted a lot of interest from our industry partners that they work with. There was the possibility of selling corporate memberships to the library as well, which would have been a good income source, but we didn't go down that route. But this did help sell it to the executive board in the first place. So here are some of the pictures. The IT team commissioned this table, which you can search the database on it, and it really helps students lay out the materials when they're looking at them. That was a session that was happening for students. And then this was a picture of one student who used the library an awful lot, and this was her final degree show. So most importantly, it's really clear that the materials chosen for products has improved in previous years since the introduction of the library. Reports have noted, and anecdotally, staff have reflected that students are explaining and justifying their chosen materials based on research. They're making informed choices due to the research process that they now undertake, which I think is all a librarian wants to wish for. that was an annual course monitoring report, and then there's my details. So I was really sad to sort of leave Ravensbourne like halfway through this project, just after launching it. But I can attest that Billy has gone on to do brilliant things, and Anne is nodding too. So she's taken it from strength to strength, and she's just about finished writing her MA dissertation about it. So do look out for her in the future presenting about the impact of it. So my details are there. If you'd like Billy's details, then come and ask me as well. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really interesting, and I'm sure we'll have a great discussion in the questions at the end. So next up, we have got Julia Flood and Beth Thompson, both from University of Arts London, and they're going to be talking about information literacy workshop.
Hi, I'm Julia Flood, and I'm Assistant Academic Support Librarian at Central St Martin's.
Hi, I'm Beth Thompson, and the same.
So both of us represent Foundation in Art and Design, as well as BA Jewellery and BA and MA Performance Design and Practice. So what we want to do in this lightning talk is to talk about our interaction with the Foundation Art and Design course, specifically compare two types of workshops that we've been rolling out over the last academic year, 2017-18, namely general introductions to online resources, and then some project-specific workshops that we've been doing with specialist pathways, and then give you just a wider context of the type of support that we offer Foundation students, be that through library tutorials and other things, and just an overview of where we think we're heading in the next year.
Okay, so for the Foundation course at CSM, you can see it's quite a large cohort and quite a short course. The four curriculum areas are graphic and communication design, fine art, fashion and textiles, and three-dimensional design and architecture. And within those, there's 12 pathways that cover lots of different sub-disciplines. The students have two options for routes through the course. The diagnostic route involves rotating around a few different pathways before specialising, and the specialist route, they just do one pathway all the way through. On top of all that complexity in supporting them, they recently moved campus. So from 2012 until last academic year, they were based at the main Central St Martin's campus at King's Cross, but they've since moved up to the Archway campus, which is 2.5 miles away, which also means they're further from the library. Anyway.
So this is how trialling our general online resource introductions came about, and it stemmed really from a problem that we had heard about and that we knew about with information skills provision with the Foundation course. Some of this came from feedback from tutors who talked about how students didn't really use in-depth resources, that they used Google a lot, and they were frustrated that deeper research was not reflected in the work that was produced by the students. And we did do some information literacy classes with students anyway, with some specialist pathways. So we did have some feedback from students about those that we had done in the previous few years. And the students had said that these were way too late in the year, around December, January time. And even though they did coincide with some projects, the students wished they had known about our online resources way before that, just so that they could use those and apply those in other shorter projects. So we thought we need to get access to all of Foundation students. We do give inductions to all of them, but the information skills provision with pathway specialists wasn't necessarily always taken up by them. So we weren't seeing all of the students and talking about online resources with them. So we decided to trial some general introductions to online resources, and this was going to go across all of the pathways, diagnostic and specialist, and it was arranged in conjunction with the program director for Foundation at Archway.
Okay, so yeah, spoiler alert, it didn't really work. We think this is mainly because we had sort of lots of groups from different pathways, so they were very lots of, oh dear, that's not worked. Sorry. This is the feedback is mostly very useful or partly useful, and the top two sort of blue segments in the corner are not useful or I don't know. So obviously it wasn't really ideal for what we were looking for. And we concluded that mainly this was because we had groups of different pathways. Some were still in the diagnostic phase. So we couldn't really make it really specific and relevant enough. I think it was too general, and the students couldn't really relate it to anything that they were currently doing, any of their current research projects and stuff.
So these sessions didn't really work, and actually the turnout for some of them wasn't great either. So we decided that we had enough time left in the academic year to focus in on some project-specific workshops once the students had made the transition to their specialist pathways. And this was done through collaboration with tutors. We met them individually and discussed the projects that the students were focusing on at the time, and how we could actually infuse these information resource workshops with relevant information and contextual information for them. Therefore, they were given specific tasks to carry out. A lot of these were focused on keyword building and discussing their ideas with their partners, and then they would have to go through and apply their keywords to different databases in a kind of live session that we helped with. This was held in a computer room, and the librarians were really there in a supportive role. So often the students did live demos themselves of the searches that they had done, and spoke about what was successful and unsuccessful about these searches, and the information therefore was relevant and contextual to them. They were interested and engaged, and they got to talk about their research project to their partner, which we think that they really valued. And we had a couple of librarians there so that we could also give each couple some FaceTime, just so that we could spend a few minutes looking at their keywords and helping them specifically. And this was really reflected in the feedback that we got from them. We also changed our feedback method. So this time it was based online. And we only asked them 2 questions, but one of them was, did you find this session useful, with a range of values? But the second one was, could you give us any comments about how you felt about this session? And we found that the students really talked about the databases that they use and what would be useful to them. They gave us specific examples, which was just what we were looking for, and really contrasted with the previous online introductions.
So in addition to the information literacy workshops, we also did individual library tutorials with students. And take-up of these has been extremely low in the past, but improved this year following some changes that we made. So we changed the terminology. We used to call them one-to-ones, but we changed it to library tutorial, and people seem to connect with that idea much more about what it might entail. And it also tallied with the study support provision they have on Foundation, which they have research and reflection tutorials. And we work quite closely with the study support tutor, so it sort of aligned quite closely with what she was doing. We also piloted referral forms following the study support tutor's example. So we provided these to the course tutors to give to the students when they're having progress tutorials with the students. So they could recommend to the students that they come and see us, and also highlight to us any specific areas they thought they might need help with. And we based the tutorials at Archway. We did most of them up at Archway, so we went to where the students are, and also did a few at King's Cross in the library as well. And this was a big success. And we had a lot more students coming to see us than we have in the past, and we had really good feedback from the academic staff about it, especially us going up to Archway to do them, and so we're definitely going to expand this next year.
So where to next? We really feel that this year has seen a departure from previous years, in that we would like to stay with the project-specific workshops. We've now know that students really enjoy them, and that the tutors that we've worked with have given us very positive feedback. So we're going to try and roll these out across all specialist pathways. Of course, that's easier said than done. Actually, we've already got people signing up for them. And so I would say that this summer is a time where we're going to concentrate on talking to tutors individually and talking about specific pathway projects along the year in which we can participate. And instead of giving general introductions to information resources, we're going to kind of cut that out, this kind of instructive element, and we're going to create videos that we can embed on the visual learning environment, Moodle, so that students can dip in and out of very basic information that will allow them to know how to search a catalogue and how to get access to e-resources and what those relevant e-resources are for their pathways. And this is something that they can revisit as many times as they like. We're also going to expand the use of referral forms throughout the year too. And this is particularly relevant to our interaction with tutors. We really want to speak more with tutors so that when they give their tutorials to students, they're able to know that if the bibliography isn't strong enough or if the student looks like they've been struggling with finding relevant information, they can immediately refer them to us. So hopefully we will get an uptake, further uptake in referrals. And of course, we want to make sure that foundation students know that we're around. They now are separate to Central St. Martin's physically, so we need to make sure that we're present for them. We've been doing this year by sharing the academic support office with academic support colleagues for tutorials, and we're going to continue to do this. And the same also with the actual tutors and pathway leaders themselves, so that we're constantly a presence there.
Just to say thank you, and if there's any other librarians, as I'm sure there are, that support foundation courses, we'd be really interested to talk to you about the unique challenges and privilege that it is to support those students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm definitely stealing that library tutorial terminology. Well, this is Elizabeth from Case Western Reserve University, and you are going to be talking about exhibitions in libraries.
My name is Elizabeth Meinke. I create exhibits for 3 gallery spaces in the library at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, USA. Having to frequently explain what I do professionally led me to ask, why isn't the act of exhibition synonymous with libraries? Exhibits, simply defined as visual and experiential displays, are very much part of a 21st century all-encompassing approach to library services. Not only are exhibit components evident in libraries of the past, exhibits are vital to libraries in the future. This view of exhibition as one part of a broad spectrum of library services is echoed in the work of John Cotton Dana, who headed the Newark, New Jersey Public Library and Newark Museum in the early 20th century. Dana's legacy to librarianship is as disruptor, that's why I think I like him so much, and proponent of creating opportunities for informal and visual styles of learning, like library exhibits. Exhibition has always been part of libraries. The Library of Alexandria was just one component of the larger Museum of Alexandria, which included not just text scrolls, but scholars in residence, exhibits, even a zoo, as accounted in Strabo's geography. Many modern scholars of museum studies, like Eileen Hooper Greenhill, make the point that in the past there was no defined separation of library and exhibiting institution. Rather, monastic scriptoriums in the Middle Ages or the Wunderkammern of elites that contained texts, relics with magical powers, natural specimens, and or art objects were defined as precious collectives. There was little distinction between or pure definition of library or museum. Sir Francis Bacon described the ideal collective to stimulate learning as equal parts, and I'm paraphrasing, text collection, exhibited objects, specimen zoo garden, and lab makerspace. I'd say this is very much in line with John Cotton Dana's Workshop of Delight. So what happened? As you all know, the function of a primarily text collective or primarily exhibiting institution solidified in the 19th and well into the 20th century. as the notions of the public library or museum for public betterment emerged. Contributing factors were compulsory education, increased literacy, and the commercial print industry. These cemented the library's role as a place to mostly access text-based information. In present day, we know library exhibits work. We want to create them. Patrons want to see them. Theoretically, administrators want us to develop exhibits, though they want us to be able to do a bit of everything very well, don't they? Realistically, exhibits are labor-intensive. This includes design, curation, PR, event planning, conservation assessments, building supports, and my least favorite, exhibit scheduling. In a museum, each of these tasks is overseen by departments of many. The exhibit technician in a library is often a team of one, and often they will have other job responsibilities. So how do we measure the success of library exhibits? Are they even worth it, given the amount of time and work? What I offer to you and your institutions is to consider the impact of exhibits. Exhibits are part of the scholarly output of your university. I was asked to write an article for a theater arts journal after a member of their guild saw an exhibit I curated that included historic marionettes. I simply repurposed my research and writing from the exhibit for the article. It has been suggested that developing an exhibit is even more challenging than writing for an academic journal, because with an exhibit, you are writing for a far more diverse audience, diverse and varied audience, academically speaking. And most of the story in the exhibit is not told through text. There are a lot of challenges with that. Initially, I had to fight to get these marionettes accessioned into special collections at Case. I'm proud to have proved the mindset that objects other than text, books, AV, manuscripts don't belong in special collections as incorrect within my institution. Selfishly, it is because I know objects make for far more interesting exhibits as opposed to scanned images or just books. Not only are the marionettes extremely popular with patrons, the marionettes went on to be featured in an Emmy-nominated PBS documentary. All of this interest generated by exhibiting marionettes increased funding that went on to provide for staff hired to process and digitize our unprocessed theater arts collections. That's impact. An exhibit program can be part of your university's instruction and career development for students. My institution has a very prominent art history program, though the graduate students report that they don't get a lot of practical hands-on museum work experience because they mostly assist the curators with research. I teach these students how to take a caption from a text document, format it into a nicely designed Adobe file, we print it, we mount it to board, foam core or museum board, and hang it on a wall. In turn, this minimizes some of my labor. So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement sometimes. I'd also advise you to coordinate library exhibits with existing community programming where your exhibit is just one component of a larger event. This way, much of the outreach and advertising work is done for you. My final bit of advice is that simple and universal, dare I say fun, exhibit themes are best. I just closed a children's literature exhibit in special collections. Not only did it have the largest attendance numbers of any of our previous exhibits, it also brought in the most diverse audiences and the greatest proportion of people from outside of the university. I hope this inspires you and your institution to develop library exhibits. Thank you.
So yeah, there are a lot of discussions at UIL and I'm sure other places as well about getting students into the library who maybe never come in to the library. And I think obviously everything that you've talked about here are ways that we can target those students. But I was wondering if you had any tips or any ideas for the future about specifically helping those students into the library.
Well, I've particularly found that having it depends what route you want to go down, I suppose, because as we were just discussing in a previous talk, you can reach more students by communicating more with the course or engaging with the course more, which sometimes can be nigh on impossible. So it's not necessarily something that always works. And then the other way is to offer things outside those courses. So I think that in Foundation, we've managed to engage our students by engaging with the tutors themselves. And we've really found that because the tutors want students to show more in-depth use of their resources, that they've approached us and we've approached them at tangential points in the academic year. And that's really worked for us. But I think it is a really good question. I'd like to know more information about how to engage with courses as well, because it can be difficult.
Yeah, I was going to say that I found that kind of being a bit just really pushy, really. I went to as many kind of academic meetings that I was able to go to just be a library representative, because then people were bringing those conversations to the table, and just, going, like, for the lecturers and for the academics to see your passion within libraries, then it means that they will try and incorporate that into the course and get the students feeling the same way, because a lot of the time the academics are passionate about libraries, but it's how to bridge that gap. So just try and turn up to everything.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I've got loads.
It's about the referral forms and what the reaction of the students that are kind of getting those. Was there any kind of issues that arose from that?
Well, just one thing I would say about that is that it's really important for students not to be kind of too conscious that they're being treated as any different to their peers. And actually, something that didn't come across in this talk just now is that I think a lot of students do approach their academic support tutors with questions about the library, and it doesn't matter what level they're at either, or whether they're using enough resources or not enough. It's about them not knowing sometimes how to engage with the library, even though we think we're really effective at telling them that we're there. Sometimes they do go to their tutors or their academic support lecturers first for some reason, and so that's why referral forms are really a good way of getting in contact with those students. But it is important for our academic support colleagues and our tutor colleagues to kind of not kind of really place any negative value on being referred, because that's not what it's about. And I've spoken to colleagues who have talked about that in the past, and they've said that they're very careful not to do that, because it's meant to be useful for the whole spectrum of students, not just those that are struggling.
So I just wanted to add that the study support tutor has used them for some years, and she's done a lot of work generally on making the study support provision not be seen as remedial, and that seems to having a big impact now, and she has a really high take up from students on voluntary and being referred. So I think we thought, as we're doing the same as what she's done, hopefully students won't see it as any different. But that is interesting. We should explore that more.
Yeah, because it's actually something we've experimented with at Huddersfield as well, kind of things we can give to academic staff and to academic skills tutors so they can more formally refer students to the library and make it, more of a tangible thing. You need to go and do this, and here's where you need to go, and kind of almost like a prescription kind of thing. This is what you need help with, but we still haven't got it quite right. So quite interesting to see what you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we'd have all the tutors telling all the students they should come and see us all the time, which obviously might be a bit overwhelming, but that would be, we'll deal with that if it happens.
Sometimes I think it's the tutors just kind of assume that the students know that they need to go to the library, when really they're not as clued up as perhaps their tutors think they might be in terms of where they can go and get support for different things.
I think the thing that I like the most about them is that they're really quite simple. When you look at the information on there, it's probably information they can find online anyway, like your contact details, where you are, or that you're running some sessions. But they're just so meaningful, because it's like the medical thing of if you went to a doctor and they said, I'm going to refer you, you would take note of that and actively engage in that, where if you were just told, like, just go to the library, you know, that they've got support in there for you, then it's not as meaningful. So I really like them.
I actually have a question for Elizabeth about the exhibitions, because it's actually an area of interest of mine. I did my dissertation on exhibiting library collections, and I was quite interested when you said that, you know, this idea of being expected to do a bit of everything and having to do lots of different, quite specialist things quite well. And it's this idea that we're librarians, we're not museum professionals. So I just wanted to kind of ask you how you kind of felt about our, you know, the quality of our exhibitions, and whether there's a danger that if we do poor exhibitions, what are the negative consequences of that if we don't have the right skills to be able to do it properly?
One bit of advice is I communicate to my administrators that I am a team of one, and that sometimes less is more. For example, I would rather do, you know, 3 really concentrated, well-done exhibits versus doing, you know, 5 to 7 that, you know, just try in an effort to appease everyone.
Yeah, so it's about managing those expectations and setting out, we're a library, this is what we can do in terms of exhibitions. Because, you know, museum professionals, that is a specialist profession in itself. And sometimes there's that danger that, are we doing it well enough? Because we're trying to do lots of everything. So it was quite interesting to hear it from your perspective and see what you've been doing.
Well, thank you. And I'd also recommend to start simple, start small, and baby steps.
Start small.
Yeah.
A little, like a kind of a stepping up your book display almost, and turning it into more something that's got a bit more interpretation to it, a bit more contextualization in terms of the information you're presenting. Because we do displays in our library, but we probably don't do them very well.
Well, I think a challenge is outside folks don't realize all the amount of work that goes into them, and everyone's a critic.
Excellent,
Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions from the room? On at the back there.
Thank you. My question was for Elizabeth. Thank you very much for a really interesting talk. I was thinking about exhibitions in the library as a kind of way to animate your collections or put a critical eye into them, because you can obviously, sometimes libraries are very bound by the classification systems that they have, that things have to be organized in a certain way. And I was wondering if you'd ever used an exhibition to kind of critique those kind of spatial arrangements and kind of get people to think a little bit more about, because I know the role that books have in the library space.
Well, I haven't done an exhibition on library classification systems. However, I challenge myself and folks in my profession as well to take exhibits beyond the book. I love books. I'm sure we all love books, and that's the reason why we went into this profession. But not every book, I guess the museum to library differentiation is that most things in a museum are works of art, most books aren't works of art. So it's more, exhibits are more about an idea, a thesis statement, if you will, and I play off that. Whatever message I'm trying to convey, identify items that aren't just books, and hopefully I'm telling the story in a very visual, and it doesn't necessarily have to be linear, but when you tell it in a linear way, it communicates better. I think it makes more sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking really in terms of bringing books together in the library space that sometimes aren't together. But obviously, I take your point about other kinds of exhibits in the library space as well. So, yeah.
Oh, well, yes, absolutely. Sometimes the items that we select are more for their aesthetic value. Sometimes they're for exhibition purposes. And sometimes it's more for information content. So a little bit of both.
more on the same thing, Elizabeth. How do you gather your information about impact?
So just to repeat that question, if you didn't hear, that was about how do you gather your information about your impact?
In my institution, we have an assessment officer. That it doesn't sound too much fun, but we do have folks that count, the amount of people that come to an exhibit, the amount of people that come to an event, the times that I work with faculty, the amount of student workers I have, that sort of thing. But I think that also goes to the larger question of, work in cultural institutions, something that we might consider minor, deeply influences and impacts one person that changes the world. However, most of the work we do, people pass it by. So I don't know if I can answer that question. That's probably a reason why I'm not in assessment. I favor the more qualitative results, and that's okay. And I think in doing this sort of work, you have to be okay with that. Did I answer your question? Okay.
One at the very, very back there.
Yeah, I think what was really interesting about all of your talks was there seemed to be space for you to operate as individuals whilst actually working in sort of quite large settings. So I was a librarian and now I'm an academic, and when exhibitions happen or information literacy sessions happen or acquisition of things happen, they tend to be quite governed by committees. And I wondered if any of you wanted to speak to the idea of autonomy within the roles that you're in versus collaboration or alongside collaboration.
Yeah, I think definitely at CSM and probably at wider UAL as well, we're given a lot of autonomy to, especially in our information literacy and in acquisitions and things like that, that we're able to tailor that completely to the course that we support. And we've definitely had a lot of support from our colleagues there about, because obviously with Foundation, if we do project-specific workshops with them, it takes a whole day. So we have to do 4, because there's 100 in a pathway sort of thing. And they've been very supportive of that, about giving us time away from the desk or helping us out with the actual workshops instead. But generally, yeah, we're very much sent off to do what we think, along with the course, is best. Sometimes it's scary, but sometimes it's generally really good. Yeah.
I'd say I had too much autonomy because at the time that the project started, my line manager, who was the director of libraries and estates, went off on long-term sick leave. Then there was an estates issue with staffing as well. So not only did I have to sort of project manage it from the library point of view, but I had to project manage the whole estates changes, which was fine because I'd done a number of projects where I had to make quite big estates changes, but I definitely learned from the mistakes that I'd learned in those. And then, nothing went wrong this time, which is probably why I've chosen to present about it. But it was a very lonely process, being the only person there to see it, oversee the install. There was no estates people there. I had to do all the measuring. I had to work out all the, the RAMs for how it was going to work. It was pretty overwhelming, and I kind of wish I didn't have as much autonomy, but in hindsight, I survived, so there's no big deal. But that's what I quite like about my current role with the estates changes that I've had to do to space and impacting on students. There's more support, which is nicer. Yeah, so getting a good balance.
Just to say one last thing about, because you were talking about collaboration as well, and I think that at UAL we're very fortunate in working with academic support colleagues and other colleagues in our language centre and student services. So there has been ample opportunity to being given the autonomy to be able to devise our own sessions. We're doing those also in conjunction with colleagues from other areas too, and that's especially been the case in Foundation. We've worked with Pauline Moon, who's academic the support lecturer, one of the academic support lecturers at Foundation. And we've managed to really develop some of our, even just kind of presence at Archway via her, because she's situated there. So that's been very important for us. And again, we've just been able to do that in a personal relationship with her.
A good question about autonomy. I'd say on a day-to-day basis, depending on the day, I either want more or less. Some days, it's almost, different parts of the university want this exhibit or this project done in a certain way, and I want nothing more than to be left alone. And then, as you speak about being responsible for, so many things that, you become a jack of all trades, you would like a little more collaboration. So it's 50-50.
Thank you. Probably got time for one more question, if anyone's got anything to ask. One over there.
Lovely, Sarah. You may not be able to answer this because of the whole autonomy thing, but did you find any other parts of the library that you had to find? The reason I'm asking this specifically is when I'm trying to get anything sort of new and innovative into our library, the customer services librarian who's obsessed with seating and really would like to get rid of all books, actually is quite problematic to get around to new things. Did you find anything sort of similar to that?
The space was made by, it was a bit of a dead space anyway, and we kind of had to shunt the collection around, and we actually chose to withdraw some old print journals, which ideally would have been withdrawn in the summer, but we were busy doing other things. So that kind of worked to our advantage. There was definitely a moment where somebody didn't realise that they'd approved the paper that said about withdrawing the print journals, that then had a problem with withdrawing the print journals. But when he looked at the titles, he just couldn't really argue with it, which kind of helped. But everyone could just see the benefit of the new shiny materials library that they kind of quickly forgot, which was nice. Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yes.
Well, that's been a really interesting set of talks on very different topics, but all, as we've discovered in the questions, quite interconnected. And it's nice to know that there is such a thing as sometimes too much freedom and responsibility as a librarian. And it's nice to know that you feel as well that sometimes you just want someone to be there doing it with you rather than trying to do things on your own. So that's the end of this lightning talk. There's now a break for half an hour, and then it is workshops happening from 4:10. So you'll have the details of where you're meant to be on your lanyard. Thank you, everybody.